Young people are already reshaping how food is grown, shared, and sustained. The Mizizi Youth Voices podcast series brings you their stories. This is a space where we spotlight young leaders working in sustainability and regenerative spaces. Through conversations with young people from different parts of the world, we explore ideas, challenges, and innovations shaping more just, resilient, and sustainable futures. This mini-series focuses on youth voices in food and farming and is connected to the Mizizi magazine Youth Edition launching in June 2026. You can learn more at mzizimag.africa. This mini-series is a collaboration between Mizizi magazine, Young Professionals for Agricultural Development, ICLEI Afri Food Links, and Green Action Week. My name is Hannah Hopper, and I will be your host for this series. Hello and welcome to Mizizi Youth Voices. Today I'm joined by Keamo Rakgoadi, a youth activator, storyteller, and bridge builder working at the intersection of land, community, and ancestral wisdom. As an Indigenous knowledge system steward, Keamo's work centers on reconnecting people to living wisdom held within the earth, within community, and within themselves. Through facilitating transformative learning spaces, dialogues, youth-led initiatives, she explores how ecological literacy, Indigenous knowledge, and storytelling can help shape more regenerative futures. Keamo reflects deeply on what it means for young people to navigate a world facing environmental and social crises while remaining rooted in belonging, memory, and collective care. Passionate about amplifying youth voices and alternatives ways of being, she is committed to creating spaces where young people can reclaim their inherent wisdom, reimagine their relationship with land and identity, and contribute meaningfully to the future they are inheriting. Keamo, it is wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you, Hannah. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Me too. Well, let's get started with the first question. What drew you to working in food systems, agriculture, or sustainability as a young person?
So I think with food systems, it's really something that we live every day, right? We're aware of the fact that we need food on a daily. And I became a lot more curious about our relationship with the food in our homes, that we actually don't know how an apple was grown, how long it took, where it came from, even the journey of what is fresh produce that comes from another province, perhaps, and then comes to where you are in your supermarket, just how that's maintained. I think there was a big curiosity around the process of food and how we exist with it and what our relationship is. And then from there on, it was also thinking further into, okay, what are farming methods? How do we preserve food? And then learning more about pesticides, learning about indigenous ways of farming and those technologies. So I would say what brought me into it was curiosity, first and foremost. It's been a very interesting journey since.
So you touched on wanting to connect and develop more of a relationship with food systems around you and noticing that there is a bit of a disconnect between us and where our food comes from, which raises this next question. From your perspective, what is one of the biggest challenges facing food systems in your region right now?
I would say one of the biggest challenges is really around pesticides, especially because I live in an urban area in Johannesburg. So a lot of our food is coming from other places. And I think the farming methods that are used to preserve them and make them look a particular way, because the market also wants food to look pretty. It's not wanting organic food that is supposed to rot in its natural timing and all of that. But instead, you have spinach that can sit in your fridge for sometimes 3 weeks to a month and still look sharp. So I think it's really just this disconnect, a bit of a cognitive dissonance around the fact that our food is grown in a particular way, comes from far, and is preserved with chemicals we don't even know of, and not thinking into the fact that in our urban areas, there are a lot of illnesses. There are a lot of people who can even claim to live healthy lives, yet they know that at a certain age, they'll deal with certain illnesses or ailments like high blood pressure or immune issues as well. So, yeah, I would say it's really about the quality of our food that is quite a challenge, and people's lack of awareness around the fact that the two are connected. I guess another additional challenge, which is more systemic, speaks more to accessibility, also to good, healthy food. So, if we wanted to have more organic food, for example, that's accessible, it tends to work out more expensively just because it's grown with a bit more care. And then people tend to opt for your pesticide food instead of your organic food, mainly because the cost of living in the cities is so expensive that you just want your food to just nourish you and give you the fuel that you need as an individual so you could go about your day and continue to serve the machine. Yeah, I think that's a long way of saying that it's accessibility to the right kinds of foods that are necessary for us, that are good for us, and that are grown in caring ways, full of care, full of actual nutrition and flavor, and our need to survive through food that's ridden with pesticides and chemicals, lacking in taste, and honestly, the bottom of the barrel a lot of the time because our good foods are imported to first world countries or Western countries.
You raised a really important point around access to healthy and nutritious food, especially in the urban context. With that in mind, what role do you think young people can play in transforming our food systems, especially in urban areas?
One thing I've come across in Soweto, one of the townships in Johannesburg, is a lot of urban farmers who are working collectively with the community to have better food consciousness. Most of these initiatives are youth driven or they're running in schools. So it's additional land that's maybe attached to the primary school or near a community space where people convene in a community. I think what young people can do is exactly what's being modeled in those areas where people are exploring agroecology from a curiosity perspective. I've come across business students who are linking with farmers, basically helping inform and strengthen each other's work, but also raising a deeper consciousness around food and how it enters market and ways to think about food differently. So many ways, but I would say definitely starting to think more collectively around how we can work with the land around us and bring in this higher food consciousness because as young people, we have access to more information than I think humans have had in history in terms of just, you can open up a device and research how to grow Jerusalem artichokes, and then you've got all the nutritional value provided to you there, the growing techniques, when to grow it, all provided just by the internet. And I think our access to this knowledge and information should definitely be what we use to empower us when we gather and engage with the land in our communities.
It's interesting what you're raising because there's a bit of an irony, the fact that we have more access to information than ever, but we are still sitting with this issue of lack of awareness around where our food comes from. But I love the fact that you spoke about how there actually are a lot of programs, especially in informal settlements in and around your city, that are working on improving food consciousness, and that is especially led by young people. This feeds very nicely into the next question. What gives you hope when you think about the future of food and farming?
What gives me hope is that we're having this conversation right now and that there are a lot more people speaking about this and that the regenerative movement itself, when it comes to how we grow food, thinking about agroecology and how we think about soil and our indigenous knowledge and food and the elements all in one framework of thinking, that all gives me hope because it feels like we're almost formalizing the way that all this information is sitting and we can see how it all just forms this big puzzle in a sense that we're trying to solve. So I feel like we're at a point in history or a point in time or in the future perhaps that allows for us to really be more expansive than we ever have before around food because we can understand what has been done to the food system and the introduction of glyphosate and these chemicals that are actually even used for warfare and how they've now made it into our food systems. We have that information of where it can go and the detriment of it, as much as we also have the information around better and more productive ways of cultivating food systems, even if it's a community garden project, that it just takes one garden to inspire another and another. And next thing you have this incredible movement that can now bring forth food security in an area where people typically would have needed to rely on whatever income to get them food at supermarkets where the cost of food is continuously rising. So, yeah, there's a lot of movement around food sovereignty. There's a lot of movement around just even putting it together in theory so that we can put it together in our community sharing and practice. And I think there are a lot of people who have the energy to really, really push food systems transformation forward in a way that gives me so much hope. And I think also just one last thing is when you speak to young people anywhere, anyhow, and you start to talk about food and farming, it's really, really amazing how many of us actually care about it and not this misconception that we have that, youth are people who are kind of, we're apathetic. We don't really care so much about our environments and where things are going and all of this. And, we're exhausted and overwhelmed because we're inheriting all of the world's problems. Meanwhile, we've got all this drive, passion, and dreaming that lives within us. It just needs places to land. And yes, once we are on the land, we can help these dreams grow and really seed amazing things for our future. So that gives me a lot of hope.
So you work a lot with youth, and I think we can both acknowledge how important young people are in this movement around food sovereignty. What first inspired you as a young person yourself to walk this path of reconnecting communities, especially youth, with Indigenous knowledge and ecological stewardship?
So for me, it's quite personal, I would say. Being a young African lady living in a city, but having family members who live in informal settlements, rural areas, and just basically belonging to two paradigms, but you know what paradigm has been taught to you to be the ideal one. I think just grappling with all these aspects of identity as myself led me to inquire a lot more about what were our traditional systems that I don't have access to anymore? And what does that speak to in relation to land, in relation to food, in relation to even how we engage each other as humanity? I think with that, it just really shone a lot of lights around how intricate the design of colonization really was. And I think in wanting to decolonize myself and just get back to the states of going back to fetch it, there's a term used by the Akan people of ancient Ghana called sankofa, which means to go back to fetch it. It's just about this returning to yourself so that once you know yourself and who your makeup is and who your ancestry, where your ancestry is from, who your ancestors are, it helps and equips you for who you need to be for the future and understanding our purpose a lot more. Same way that our names carry dreams and aspirations or even information of what our people did, how they performed in society. I've just come to understand the value of knowing oneself, especially as it relates to our identity, our indigeneity, in a way that was not really welcomed with previous regimes or systems that we've come from, especially in South Africa. I think also just being a fangirl for planet Earth, that naturally weaves into knowing that this is not separate from the land, that every bit of wanting to know and a curiosity around sovereignty as well is linked also to some of what we experience systemically around land, accessibility, again, how our food is grown, who makes those decisions. Yeah, so it's a lot of curiosity and really a deep wanting to return to the deeper parts of myself so that I can also just be a strong vessel, a steward for whatever this work is calling for me to do.
You touched on a critical point around identity and returning to yourself and finding alternative ways of being. From your perspective, what are some of the deeper challenges that we face with regards to our relationship with the earth?
I believe that a lot of us are not in tune with the earth in the way that's very simple and accessible, in the way that a lot of our ancestors were. And that's, our calendars were linked to moon systems. So knowing what moon phase we're at, or even seasonally how nature behaves, that would ultimately also dictate how we farmed our food, how we engaged with each other, and even as an individual, knowing when to go inward and do whatever deep inner work or more solitude, similar to in nature when we see animals go into hibernation. And then in the summer, you come out and you flourish and you bloom and, all of that. So I think that we are out of touch with our natural rhythm or our rhythm with nature. And that in turn has affected our relationship with the earth as just this place that we can sometimes take for granted, whether it's just leaving a paper wrapper on the floor and not throwing it away, or whether it is the way in which we tend to the land that might not necessarily be generative, the systemic extractive ways of being, and even how, as human beings, we have to continuously give and be very productive, but it's not necessarily in service to ourselves or our highest goods or for our community, but rather being caught up in survival mode. So the earth and nature show us every day that you can start anew, and we see these processes of death and rebirth, even in the way that the seasons move. And I think as human beings, if we could get deeper in touch with those parts of ourselves, it would ultimately strengthen our relationship with our home planets, because there's only one earth that we know of that we can inhabit, and it's important to nurture her as our first mother.
You mentioned that for various reasons, most people have lost a connection to the earth and those natural rhythms, which has led to a more destructive and sort of extractive relationship with the earth, which is completely different to how our ancestors related. Looking forward, what role do you believe young people could play in restoring a more regenerative, community rooted way of living and relating to food, land, and one another?
I would say that getting together, so already just forming community, is a helpful starting point for young people to start thinking about how we restore, the more regenerative ways of being in relation to the earth and the land and with each other. It's really just being able to find each other as a starting point, and we are all holding a lot of inherent wisdom. And so, if you know something about the way that the wind moves in a particular way, and somebody else knows about soil health, and I might know about water systems, just bringing that knowledge together helps us have a better understanding of where we are based in place and how we can then start forming deeper relationality with the land, with our food and human systems, and ultimately with each other, right? So, yeah, I would say that just getting together and having conversation as a starting point, and then letting that progress into doing. Whether it's a simple project, we decide that, okay, let's do an awareness hike and invite other young people from the community so we can walk these lands and all share what we might know. All of our grandparents might have different pieces of the history where some might say, oh, that's where we used to farm, or where the cattle would graze, and somebody else might be able to tell you about other cultural shifts, whether there were certain tribes or First Nations that existed in those places over periods of time, and how they engaged with each other and how they worked with the land. I think there's a lot of deep listening that we can offer each other that will unlock all this incredible wisdom that allows for us to build the new worlds that we seek to have and that we know are possible.
I love that you mentioned this idea of finding one another again and learning and sharing regenerative knowledge and ancient wisdom. And from that place, we can build regenerative action for the future. What gives you hope when you see young people engaging with ancestral knowledge, climate justice, and collective care in this moment?
What gives me hope is a deeper knowing of ourselves. I think that that's absolutely crucial, especially in the age where we are experiencing a lot of young people with mental health issues, or even just complete disconnect from support systems, whether it's even nature as a support system. So, yeah, I think being able to tap into all of this beautiful knowledge and sharing and community will empower each of us as individuals, and honestly just shift the way in which we see our world in a way that allows for us to be more generative, more expansive, and continue the knowledge forward, because there are other generations that will benefit from the knowledge that's currently sitting and unfortunately being lost with our elders as they depart. It's important for us to hold this knowledge, this awareness of ourselves, and all this wisdom that we would have inherited from previous generations so that we can pay it forward to the future generations and ensure that this work that we're doing continues. It's really a way of ensuring that whatever we're doing right now with what we're equipped to do, we're able to pay that forward so that the next generation are even more equipped than we were. And so it will go.
We've lost some of this incredible knowledge, but we can build that up again and then pay that forward. And this shift in the way that we see the world and ourselves and others can really feed into and impact the purpose that we decide to choose for our own lives. If you could change just one thing in food systems for young people, what would it be?
If I could change one thing, I think that it would be the awareness that we can just start, we can just do it. So it's more of a mindset shift. I think sometimes when we think about food systems, it can seem very massive and very far away. Meanwhile, it could really just start with growing two herbs, whether you are living in a city and you've got some spaciousness to have pot plants, or you've got a space that is more allowing, that we should just start and experiment with growing food that we ourselves have put our energy toward. It would be a mindset shift to know that we can do it. It's not that difficult. It's all about just starting.
Thank you for reminding us that regardless of who we are or where we live in the world, we have this capacity within ourselves to just start, as you said. Before we close the session for the day, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think we're at a point in time where it's very easy to fall into the doom and gloom of where everything is. And I think this is the complexity of being in this information age, is that there's a lot of information that's telling us that we have no power, we're powerless in this, and that we kind of have to just work with what we've been given. I would like to put forward a reminder and a possible radical thinking that is all made up. I don't know if that's appropriate to say, but it's all made up, and we get to also have a say and a stake in designing the life that we believe that we should have, especially when it comes to the most crucial thing that we all have in common, which is food and eating food. I think that it's important to know that we have the power to do something and create the worlds that we want to, and that it's not something that is up to our governments or up to community leaders, but it can really begin with us. And we have it, so let's do it and find other people who have it and encourage the rest who might not feel that they've got it, that you've got it. We just need to find ways to let it shine. We're all gifted with this incredible ability to imagine and dream into the world and the lives that we want to have. And it doesn't have to be prescribed by anybody outside of ourselves.
Keamo, thank you so much for sharing your reflections and insights with us. It's been deeply inspiring to hear how your work reconnects young people with land, community, and ancestral wisdom through storytelling, dialogue, and transformative learning spaces. Your perspective reminds us that building more regenerative and just food systems is not only about policy and innovation, but it's also about belonging, memory, care, and our relationship with the earth and one another. And thank you to everyone listening. We hope this conversation has offered you a new perspective and highlighted the important role that young people are playing in shaping more resilient and equitable food systems. You can find more youth voices and stories at mzizimag.africa, including the Mizizi Youth Edition launching in June 2026. This has been Mizizi Youth Voices. My name is Hannah Hopper and I've been your host. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to bringing you more youth voices from across the world.